Okay, hello everyone, welcome. Nice to see where everyone's from. So we've got a few people from Adelaide. That's quite interesting. And one from Brisbane. I'm in Brisbane as well, and from Wellington as well. Awesome. Now, I'm hoping you can all see my screen, and you should all be able to see Education Perfect in front of you. Now, if you have any questions at all, please ask, because it seems there are about 9 people in this session. So yeah, we can be pretty flexible with how it's run and any particular direction you'd like to go in. I'll just introduce kind of my game plan for this afternoon, just to make sure the plan, if it aligns to what you're hoping for, and if there is anything else in particular you'd like me to cover. So I'm sure, as some of you know, because you've been using Education Perfect quite well, some of you are brand new. This is the homepage that you get as a teacher when you log in. And there are lots of things you can do here. So the content library is where you can view all of the lessons. So I suppose the way a lot of people use Education Perfect is they use these lessons and they assign them to their students for homework, and students can work through them at their own pace. And as a teacher, you're informed of their progress through that lesson. And they're all based on the mastery approach. If they get any questions wrong, they actually get shown the right answer, and they need to keep going until they get it correct. So that's kind of one way to use it. And I'll go into all of those things in more detail throughout the talk as well. But I suppose it's just useful to know that any of these lessons you can actually convert into assessments. And assessments, they draw out the automatically marked questions. And rather than informing you of the progress of the students, so how far they got through until they were having so much difficulty that they actually, once they're shown the correct answer and why they got it wrong, they still couldn't finish that lesson. The assessments give you a snapshot of what they do and don't know at that time. And based on their strengths and weaknesses, then they'll be recommended those lessons. So you can imagine in science, a lot of teachers have been using the assessment area for pre and post testing, for science in particular, for big revision tests about a month before the exam. Because from those strengths and weaknesses, students get those lessons. So it kind of gives them a game plan going forward. In maths, the way a lot of teachers have been using it is actually giving the students an assessment first. And rather than having to do all of the lessons, they just do the lessons of the types of questions that they weren't particularly good at. So I think that's often useful to know before we go into anything in particular detail. So you can look at these lessons and think, oh, you know, would I like to assign this as a homework task, or do I actually just want to know if they know enough of this, basically? Another really useful thing to know is this I want to. At any point, you can type something in there, and it'll kind of search for things that might be able to help you. This P will actually take you to the place where you can do that. So this is actually exactly the same as clicking here. But these question marks down here, they actually send you to pages that teach you how to. So it'll open in a new tab, and it's basically a help article that has videos embedded and GIFs and things, with PDFs with nice big arrows. I like PDFs with arrows myself, so they are really useful for me, and just take you through step by step exactly if you forget how to set a task or anything like that. Now, I suppose once you're on this page, you can see there are all these articles here, so you can kind of find whichever article you'd like to use. And there's the assessment area as well, and there are lots of how-to guides within there. This will show you the data that your students have been, from your students and your classes in particular. So I'm actually in a kind of fake account at the moment, but if your students had been doing a lesson, it'll have the rating, how many students have done it. And it'll actually filter to the top if students are doing that lesson at the moment. If you ever see a little green dot next to a student's name, it means that they are currently doing that lesson, or they're currently online. Here's our newsfeed. So this will let you know, so a lot of the newsfeed posts are from me, but this will let you know everything that's happening in terms of content updates. There's a lot of content updates here. There's also dev updates, so development, new things in development. Event updates, I'm sure, you know, PDs and things like that that are coming up in your area, that will all appear there. And that's specific to your subject area. So maths and science, you'll have ones that are about maths and science. Now, let's have a look at the content library. So within here, we have, I've highlighted maths and science up here. I thought I'd show you through, well, the content that we do have, but also some of the new things that have been added if you have been using the system quite well. So if we were to start off with science, we have, this is a private workspace that's just for you, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute, because basically at the moment we're in the browse zone. So this is where we can have a look around and browse through the lessons. There's also the option to edit and create basically your own scope and sequence based on our lessons. But we'll move to that soon. So within science, we have the proficiency tests. So for science, these are assessments that give you a snapshot of the science inquiry skill level of the students in your class. So for example, do they know the scientific equipment? Can they recognize relationships and graphs? Now, these were designed to identify gaps, not to, you know, particularly extend students, but rather if you've got a new class in front of you, sometimes it's quite nice to know if they can read a basic line graph, if they can, you know, read a column graph, things like that. So these, and now just to explain, the first one is a 30-minute test that gives you a snapshot of all of these skills, so all 13, while the second two use different questions, but if you just wanted to focus on the practical skills in science, you can, or the theoretical skills in science. So I suppose if you had time to do two separate 30-minute tests, this would probably be a more reliable result, but there's also one there that you can use. Now these tests are actually all linked to recommendations that fill gaps. So if students are, for example, struggling with scientific equipment, they'll be recommended a lesson on scientific equipment. So you could either do the tests and then have the students get the recommendations that way, or we've also put together a module here called Science Inquiry Skills, and all of those lessons are available for you to assign if you'd like to as well. So, for example, processing and analysing data. Oh, Kimberly raised her hand. Yes, Kimberly. I think if you just pop your question into the Q&A area, I'm very new to Zoom as well. Mark's kind of the, Mark's the whiz. I wonder. How do we ask a question, Mark? Answer a question.
So there should be a Q&A button if you hold your mouse over the screen, and you can submit a question through there, or just do it in the chat as well. And cool. I'll pick up on those as they come through. Awesome,
awesome, awesome. Yeah, so you can see in here, if you just wanted to assign your class a lesson on bar graphs, here's a lesson that just teaches what a bar graph is and how to interpret one. So that's quite specific, but if we go back to the Australian curriculum, we could have a look at year 8, for example. Earth and space, here's rocks. So this is what a normal topic looks like in the Australian content. Folders 1 to 3 has the science understanding content. Then we've got extension material, endeavour. These are labs, which I'll explain in a minute, and science comprehension activities. We've also got definition lists here as well. So if we were to have a look at, for example, rock types, igneous rocks. So this is, see this little symbol here with a light bulb? That's a SMART lesson. So a SMART lesson involves some information slides, some questions, often a long answer written question as well. So from this, we can see that 7,000 students have done this lesson at the moment, and they've rated it 4 stars, and on average, it's taken them 13 minutes to complete. So we can have a look at this lesson. And this is what it looks like. So this is the teacher preview zone at the moment. So we can click through it quite easily. There are videos embedded as well. And the students answer some questions. Now, if they get it correct, they can continue. If they get it incorrect, they'll be shown this explanation. and then they need to keep going within this section until they get it correct. So you can see how this lesson kind of just covers the core content of what an igneous rock is. And then we've got some more questions here. Now the long answer questions, they're actually self-assessed. So the students type in their response. And then once they submit, they'll be shown a model answer and keyword highlighting. So the keyword highlighting really gives them that sense of getting it correct. It's quite interesting to see how serious the students take the keyword highlighting. But as a teacher, you can go in and give them feedback on these long answer responses as well. So I'll show you how to do that. And then they all finish with some summary slides. So that's kind of a normal lesson, a science understanding lesson. If you wanted to assign this to your students, this is the assign button here. So assigning is that self-paced, self-directed mastery model kind of way of setting a homework task, and assess is that snapshot of what they do and don't know. So we'll click on assign for the moment. And it'll take us to this who, what, when, and a live feed area. So if I was to click on who, now your classes should appear there. This is an account I often use at conferences, so I've got a few different classes in here. So if I was to choose a test class, now at any point as well, you don't have to just assign to your classes. I've presented to a number of departments where they often have one teacher in charge of the year level, and they set the core content for everyone in the year level. So that's an option as well. So you can just click on all classes and you can see that there. You can at any point assign to specific students as well. So this is a really nice way to manually differentiate those students in your class. So if you've got some students who'd like extension work, you could just choose those two people. Now within what, we've chosen this lesson, but there are a few options here. If I was to click on the lesson, I'm able to do a couple at a time. Or if you don't want to do the whole lesson, you can assign specific sections here as well. So for example, you know, this drag and drop's a bit tricky. If I wanted to make a smaller homework task, I can just exclude that section. And you'll notice that the timer actually updates based on the average time that students have taken to complete that section as well. So this is now a 12-minute lesson rather than a 14-minute lesson. So we'll choose those three. Now you'll notice here that this average timer has updated here as well. And we can choose to name the task whatever we'd like. In terms of when, you can choose when the task starts and when the task finishes. So from the start date and time, all the students in your class will be emailed saying you have a homework task, here's the link, and they can get going. At any point, and then from the end date, they still have a week to submit their task. So there's that extra week window, which is just incredibly practical because, you know, things happen. And rather than them just being locked out of the task, you'll actually be informed that they've done it late. And it's just really useful for recognizing patterns in behavior. And then the live feed. So this is monitoring. It's pretty useful if you are doing this in class. It'll let you know who's on task, who isn't, if they're not focused, so if they've opened another tab, if they're having internet difficulty, but it'll also let you know how they're progressing through the task, which is nice to know because if you are doing it in class, you could pop in and give them feedback on those long answer questions as you know that they've completed those sections. And Dash. So we'll finish this webinar with a bit of a Dash, but Dash is a game and students only unlock it. The default is when they finish the SMART lesson. You can choose so that it only occurs when they completely finish the task. So the difference between those two is, see at the moment how I've actually chosen 3 lessons. So the students have to complete all 3 lessons. That's what the completely finish the task is. They have to finish all 3 lessons before they can access any of the dashes. So it's a bit of a reward, or just when they finish each SMART lesson. So Dash is the time trial where they're ranked against their classmates, their country, and globally in the time that they're able to answer 10 randomly selected, automatically marked questions from that lesson. The music's very stressful, but the students seem to really love it. Apparently the other day, 30,000 dashes were done in one day. So I think there are a few quite obsessive students out there really enjoying Dash. And then basically you can assign that task. So who will I assign that to? I'll just assign that to myself. And I will assign, I'll just have a look at the optional settings quickly while we're here. This is just really useful because students can go in and find whatever lessons they'd like to. They don't have to, you know, it's not hidden from them until you assign it. But once you've assigned it, it appears on their dashboard. They get the email reminders. It's really obvious that they need to do it. But if you've got some students who have gone in and done an enormous amount of lessons, for example, for a competition, and you've got a test coming up and you really want them to do this lesson again, you can untick that, and that means all of their progress will be reset for those particular lessons. So they all have to do those lessons again. Really useful for revision as well. If over time you get a bit sick of the emails, because basically from the end date, you'll be sent an email saying who's done their homework, who hasn't, and how they went. If you're just quite used to logging into Education Perfect, you can untick that and you'll just see it on your homepage, and students are emailed. There is the option to manually put in student parents' emails, but obviously at the moment we don't have the parent emails until you send them to us, so that's a school by school decision. And this is just useful if it ever happens that you're not sure which students have been emailed. So you get sent an email with a list of all the students and their emails. Sometimes it's useful because there might just be a spelling mistake. I remember with my students, one of them after 6 months told me she'd never gotten an email from Education Perfect. So I was like, oh, right. But she'd just been going in because she realized everyone else had homework and doing it herself. But that's just useful to know. You can disable question timers. They're not particularly stressful, but this was put in place because of particularly anxious students, I suppose. And you can also disable cheers. So students earn cheers when they get questions correct. Teachers get unlimited cheers. So if you ever receive cheers from students, it's a bit of a compliment because they're using them on you. But I suppose they only are able to receive cheers from their peers when they finish particular sections. So it's not too distracting, but if they go a bit overboard, you can always disable them. And then you can assign the task. So this is what it looks like when you've assigned a task. At any point, you can email students a reminder. This link takes the students to that specific homework task. So it's quite useful for embedding in, whatever LMS you use. And then you'll have all the students in your class, their username and their password, and their email address here as well. So that's really useful. If they have changed their password from the first name, which is what they're asked to do as soon as they log in, there'll be a button here called Reset, and you can reset their passwords really easily. So this is a really useful page to have up when you're just doing a task for the first time. I'll show you if I go home. So right now I'm in this yellow tasks and homework area. So if I click here, there it is, rock types. And if I click on get started, that's where I get that list of the students. Within the details area, we've got the start date and the end date. You can change the dates. You can change the students. You can change the content. So there are quite a few options here. The live feed, this is the monitoring. So here's the different pictures for the legend. But basically it's like a news feed and everything pops up here as it's going through. Focus tracking, you can turn on or off. If focus tracking is active, you'll actually be notified if students even open up a new tab. So that's why it's kind of useful to toggle on and off, because if you are using it in class, it's very useful to have on, but if they're doing it as a homework task, there's no need. Then the progress. So this is where you'll see who's done their homework and who hasn't. So we'll have a look at a sample report. Saving the Tasmanian Devil. So we can see 7 students have completed it. 1 has started and hasn't finished it yet. Within the insights here, some students are struggling and particular tests need some help. So here are all the students in the class and how they've progressed through the lessons. So see that little roadblock? That means that Tess is really struggling. She's answered the questions within this section 6 times, but 5 of those times she's gotten them incorrect. So that's what that means. This yellow bar really just indicates if students are struggling. So Sam answered it 7 times. 4 of those times he got it incorrect. And so did Louise, answered it 6 times, and she got 3 of those incorrect. Now you can see that Tessa's really struggling, but she also hasn't done any of the information sections. That's what the grey means, is that they haven't read the information. So that's quite informative. Now you can see that a few more are having trouble here. So there are 2 ways you can go about finding out more information. You can click on that student's name and see an individual profile for them and literally see what questions they were getting incorrect, view the mistakes. So she's struggling with the types of interaction that's happening between the devil and the red fox. Or we can actually go down to the whole class, a little bit further underneath here. Here's how the whole class progressed through it. So the yellow means that most students were having trouble. So if we click on this question had the least accuracy. And it's a yes or no, and quite a few of them got it incorrect. Now, the feedback area, this is really useful. Here's this button. What this does is it basically filters all of those long answer questions into one page, and you can very easily give feedback to the students. So this long answer question, it's a bit of an extra for experts. It's posing the question that if we were to conserve the Tasmanian devil by basically putting them in captivity, does it solve the problem? Because, you know, we still have the red fox there, and in terms of an ecosystem perspective, they need to explain what would happen to the ecosystem. So here's the student answer, here's the model answer, and as a teacher, we can click and leave feedback for them and give them a star rating. And from that, we can actually look at the answer reviews that teachers have left. And also, you can see here that I've actually had 2 attempts. So this was my first attempt, and that was my second attempt. I often go into schools, and when I'm sitting with teachers, sometimes more often than I kind of thought would happen, is there's often one student who's had almost 6 attempts. And it's really nice to see. And, you know, the teacher often says, oh, that student's, you know, ESL or something. And they've had 6 attempts, and each time they've included one more keyword. And by that 6th attempt, they've actually got a really good response. But, you know, because once they submit, they get to see that model answer. But then when they go to improve their response, that disappears. So they have to try and retain that improvement. So yeah, it's quite nice to see that improvement over time. So that's really the information on how to set a task and how to view the progress and the details of that task. I suppose the other way you can do it is if you go home and into this tasks and homework area, you can just click new task here, and that will take you here as well. And when you click on what, it'll open up that content library and you can have a look through. Any questions about the homework tasks? And I did a very brief look at the content library, so I'll show you a little bit more through that. We can have a look at the maths content as well. Everyone good at the moment? Great. Great. So I suppose if we wanted to, let's go into the assessment area and say we wanted to set a pre-test for Year 9 Pythagoras in maths. So within the assessment area, so I'm in this green assessment area at the moment, I can create a new assessment. And at the moment, I want to create a quick test. So if I click on that, I can go, who would I like to assign it to? The all classes here is particularly useful for assessments, because if you are doing, for example, NAPLAN practice tests, which we have written in the system, you can assign that to the whole Year 7 cohort and have that lovely whole year level data, or for the proficiency skills tests as well. I've seen a number of schools use that, and it's great to see the whole year level data, and then you can basically filter to your classes. So if I choose that class, I will assign it to myself again. So when I go into what, see how it opens up that exact same content browser. Within maths, I want to go into year 9. So this is all based on the Australian curriculum or the New South Wales syllabus as well. I'll go into measurement and geometry, Pythagoras and trigonometry. So the way this content library is set up is we have a review folder at the beginning, which kind of covers that prerequisite content for them to start. Then we've got core lessons here, extension materials, investigations, practice lists. So these are just lists of questions like worksheets, and definitions and extra resources. So if I have a look at this review folder, within here we have 6 lessons that cover angles, triangles, ratios, squares and square roots, algebraic substitution, and solving equations. So some of the things that would be quite useful to know before you really got into Pythagoras. So if we were to have a look at any of these, see how just the automatically marked question sections are being highlighted? So what that's doing is essentially we are just creating a question bank. In maths, all of the numbers are dynamic, so each time they get a question, they will be given different numbers, but we're creating a bank of questions from these. So I'll confirm my selection. There are my lessons. I could call this, I'll just call it pretest. Now, within the assessment setup, I've got 117 questions within my question bank, and I might just ask them 10. It'll choose at least 1 from each of these lessons. If we've got 6 lessons here, so we could choose 12 questions, and that way it would choose 2 from each lesson. Now this generates a unique assessment. It means each time, every student in the class will get a different assessment, but also each time the students do the assessment, they'll be given a different assessment. So I could untick that if we wanted every student to get the same test. They will be given the questions in a different order though. So if you don't have to worry about them sitting next to each other and copying, because even if they get the same 10 questions, they'll be given them in a different order. So we'll keep that ticked. We want the test to be automatically marked, and we want the results to be released to the students. Within the assessment conditions, we can choose how long we'd like to give them. And this is where you can allow them to have a couple of attempts. So for example, 5 attempts. I did hear recently for a big revision test for science, you can see how this would fit that way as well. Students did it 15 times because they were so close to getting 100%. So they just kept going, which is the record. It's the record 15 times. Now this access code, this makes it teacher supervised. So only you as a teacher have that code. So the students can't start the assessment until they're sitting in front of you. And full screen monitoring. So this is when the students start the assessment, they need to go into full screen. If they ever exit out of full screen, it'll let you know that they are a current problem and how long they've been out of the assessment for. And also the students' screens go fully red and it says you're not focused on the assessment and they need to go back into the assessment. So it's quite striking. When this is the same as the homework task. From the start date, they'll be sent an email and the end date, and then you can assign that assessment. Now, I actually did this assessment today, so I'm just going to show you my results. So go into Education Perfect and content, because I did a practice one of these today. So if we go in here, there's my Pythagoras and trigonometry pretest. So you can see it looks very similar to the tasks and homework area, but rather than live feed, it says monitor. So if we were to click on details, you'll see these options appear along here. There are a few different things. Here we can actually preview the assessment questions. We can also export a PDF version. So what that does is it sends you an email of a PDF version of that assessment. If everyone's getting a unique assessment, it'll send you all of the possible questions for you to look through. At any point, you can change the students. You can change the date, and you can also change the assessment conditions and the number of attempts, which is quite useful. If something happens and you've only set it to have 1 attempt, and everything stuffs up, you can go in and say, actually, I want 2 attempts, and then those students get another attempt. You can choose their best or last attempt to count as well. So if we have a look at the Get Started, here's that link again, but this is for an assessment. We have all the students, and that's what the reset looks like. So if the students have changed their password like they're asked to, you can reset it, and that just resets it straight back to their first name, and it's immediate pretty much. It takes a couple of seconds. So if you were just to say, Bronwyn, your password is now Bronwyn, they should be able to log in immediately. Monitor. So this is what the monitoring page looks like. So we can see that Tobin was getting quite distracted. And you can see when they submit as well. So we've got all the students. At any point, if we were to click on Tobin's name, for example, it'll just show us Tobin's history and how he progressed through the task. So some teachers use this as a talking points with students, just to say, you know, how you're going with everything. Now, the analysis. So this automatically marks it. You can see the results here. So average mark of 75%. This one, I did give them a number of attempts though. So you can see all the students in the class and how they did. If we have a look at Bronwyn, for example, this is what Bronwyn saw as soon as she submitted the assessment. Oh, yeah, so exactly, Brad. So you can, that PDF of the assessments is there as a backup. The trouble with them doing it on pen and paper is that the results aren't gathered online for you, but it is there, you know, just to bring 5 copies just in case everything goes wrong for 1 or 2 students, and you've got a backup there. Yep. So yeah, this is what Bronwyn sees. So she sees her strengths, she sees her score, and these are her next steps. So these are lessons that she can click on and start working on immediately. So it's one of those tasks that you don't have to be particularly worried if students finish the exam at different times, because most students will have something to do. We can look further down here, and here is Bronwyn's analysis. So here are all of those lessons that I chose and all of her recommended activities. So the next steps are filtered to the lowest 3. In this instance, she only has 3 next steps, but if there were more, they would appear here. Then we can see her attempts. So she improved on her second attempt. She can actually view her answers, view what she got incorrect, and why she got it wrong. So that can be the first activity, you know, just going through the questions they got incorrect in the test initially and the explanations. Then the next activity can be doing the lessons. Then of course they can go in and do that test again and be given different questions. As a teacher, you know the whole class's strengths and weaknesses as well. So here's how the whole class went. So you can see they are struggling the most with squares and square roots. Now, each student has been recommended different activities. So we can see Tobin and Fane have been recommended triangles, but Bronwyn and Tobin have been recommended angles. So what we can actually do is we can click on this button called Assign Recommended Tasks. And what that does is it actually creates a homework task that only assigns the lessons that the students need to do. So this will appear within that yellow area. And for example, Fane will be given triangles while he won't be given that lesson on angles. So you can filter, you can make it due in 7 days. You can filter by the amount of hours of work that's assigned. You can filter it by particular lessons as well. So if you didn't want them to do triangles, you can filter those recommended tasks. You can be emailed a summary report, and the students can be emailed as well. So I suppose this is a really useful way, and you can see, I've seen it used quite a few different ways as a pre-test in genetics at a school here in Brisbane. So basically they chose the first 5 lessons on genetics, you know, structure of DNA, the basic kind of ones, set an assessment, and rather than just making them all do those 5 lessons, they only did the lessons that they needed to do. It's used a lot in maths for this, just highlighting their strengths and weaknesses and basically recommending those tasks based on what each student needs to do, rather than just getting everyone to do everything. And of course, another way is we could go in, and I'll show you this quickly actually. And if we wanted to set a giant revision test, we can go into this quick test area. And within what, if we were to go into science, we'll stick with genetics, for example. Oh no, I'll do electricity because I've got some results there for electricity. So within electricity, we can actually choose all of these lessons. Now, within this bank, there's about 169 questions, and we can choose to ask them 20. Everybody gets a different assessment, and basically allow them to do it 10 times. And that could keep them going a month before the test, just giving them an indication of their strengths and weaknesses. If we were to look at what the results look like for that, look at a sample report, just so you can see the difference. You get those results, you can see how the students went, you can see the whole class's strengths and weaknesses. So if they're struggling with circuits in series or circuits in parallel, you'll know that as a teacher very quickly, but also each student is aware of their strengths and their next steps and where they could be working on in preparation for the exam that's coming up or something like that. Any questions about the quick tests at the moment, or the tasks and homework area? I really love the flexible nature of the quick tests. You know, the other thing that a lot of teachers do is they do a 5-question quiz at the end of a lesson. And so they just do a quick test based on a particular lesson. I suppose the other way that I have seen it is a teacher asked me that they wanted to do a pre-test for the whole of year 9, and they wanted to choose every single one of the questions. So I'll just show you how to do that, because that's quite useful, because, you know, even though it took a little bit more time, it was a lot quicker than writing a pre-test, them handing it out, marking it, you know, analysing it, and then moving on from there. So within the what was it? I think it was a pre-test. Even if we did do a pre-test on genetics, for example, once we get to a lesson, we can actually choose a specific section and see how we can choose the specific questions. So I might want to ask them, where is DNA located? Probably maybe that one. So you can see she basically built a 20-question pre-test asking exactly what she wanted to, but just went in and chose those specific questions. Structure of DNA. Then we can do nitrogenous bases, name the nucleotide, maybe one on complementary base pairing. And yeah, basically built a specific pre-test. Now from that, at the moment, I have 11 questions in there. So that's another way you can use it. Now over time, all of this lovely data that you're collecting is stored within the student usage and data area. So if I was to click on here, I might actually use my content test school area because they'll have some data in here. Within this view student usage and data, I can develop a full school report. So all of these blue buttons here, you can essentially filter. So it'll initially just show you your classes within the last 3 months, but you can of course choose whichever classes you'd like, choose whichever subjects you'd like to see, choose the time frame. You can do a department report. At the moment, I'm in a full school report. So I can see some recent activity, the most popular activities, student engagement. So here are some individual student reports. So if I was to look at, for example, Tobin, he spent 3 hours online. Here's what he's been doing. His class breakdown. So this is what he's been doing in my science team and my maths team, and how much he's been working in the different subject areas. Now here are all of the homework tasks that I've assigned and if he has completed them. So you can imagine in a parent-teacher interview, you could have this open and just say, you know, here are all the homework tasks that I've assigned and, you know, this particular student has done them. And here are all of the assessments and their marks. So you can imagine if you have a pre-test and a post-test on genetics or on Pythagoras, it is a lovely way to gather data on how students are improving over time. It's nice to know what the data looks like before you start planning everything, because it's nice to see that, I think. So that's kind of what the individual student reports look like as well. Now, just to show you where we are at the moment, I've had a brief look at the content library. We've set our homework task and we've looked at the data that's gathered on those homework tasks and what that means and everything like that, how to give feedback on long answer questions as well, how to assign specific parts of a homework task. And then we went into the assessment area and we set a quick test on Pythagoras and trigonometry as a pre-test. And then we also set a quick test on a big revision test for genetics. And we looked at the results of that and how to assign recommended tasks to students who need them. And we just went into the student usage and data area and had a look at how that data is gathered over time. All of that data is exportable as well. So that's all there for you. Any questions at this point? The other thing I could show you is a little bit more in the content library. For example, how the labs are set up. So within science, we have a number of science investigations. So I've split these up based on topic, but we also, for example, within Year 8 rocks, have a folder here called science investigations. So these are classroom activities or labs. So for example, this one on cooling crystals. Within here, there are 3 PDFs and a lesson. So if we were to have a look at the teacher guide, this PDF you can print off. The teacher guide has the purpose, the background information, essential vocabulary occasionally, safety information, risk management, aim, pre-prac questions and answers, instructions, materials, method, model results, and then post-lab questions and answers as well. The student version doesn't have answers and has space for them to fill in their results as well. So you can see how that works. Now you can just use those PDFs, but I suppose just because the system is the way it is, we've also written a lesson that just complements it, and it's the pre and post lab work. So the lesson actually just teaches them. So initially, this is like the pre-reading that you would ask a student to do before they came in and, you know, looked at cooling crystal. So this actually talks about how things dissolve in solution. He looks very sad when he loses his fairy floss. And then, so you can see it's just going over the core content initially. And then we ask them some questions. So just checking if they have that prerequisite knowledge, essentially. Now, these explicitly teach the aim, the material, like the variables and the hypotheses as well. It gets the students to read about it and then actually write their own. And I suppose the benefit of this is these blue sections you can give feedback on. So for one particular lab, you might just be interested in their hypothesis, and you can just go on and just give them feedback on that. But as a student, they get that immediate feedback every time they answer a question. You know, this is looking at control variables and dependent variables and asking them to think about their control variables. And then it goes through the materials and the method. So, you know, they could do up to here before coming to class, so they knew what they were doing. And then afterwards, they can actually upload an image of their crystals, and then they write their observations, Use your observations to explain how the rate of cooling of a saturated solution affects the size, and they get given that model answer. And then we've got some discussion questions as well. So there are about anywhere between 2 and 5 of these per topic for every topic between year 7 to 10. So they're all there as well. Some of them are just like classroom activities, like this is building a geological timescale. And we have one within year 7, getting them to build food webs. Occasionally they are research activities as well. So within year 9 ecosystems, we actually have a research activity asking them to research the Carmichael coal mine and looking at different perspectives on mining and how that impacts on Australia. So they are all there as well. We also have science comprehension activities. So I've put them in their own folder. And these are just literacy activities asking them to read and comprehend and then answer some questions. So within, if we were to look at rocks again, the science comprehension here looks at the baked rocks in the Lachlan Fold Belt, these ones, and zircons. So as you can see, it's just getting them to read something interesting that's, you know, scientific, and then they answer some questions about it. One thing we're working on at the moment is adding in another folder here called data interpretation. And that will involve activities that actually just present them with information. I can show you a brand new one actually. So if we have a look at, just to show you what they are going to look like. This one's about to go live tomorrow. So within homeostasis, there is a new data interpretation in here. And this is looking at maintaining temperature. So it's actually giving them a hypothetical situation where they're given an experiment. So initially it's saying why it's important to maintain temperature. And then it teaches them about a particular experiment. And then they have to graph it. This is getting them to calculate the average. And then they graph it, and then they basically infer some information about that data. So here's her data, and now we can start interpreting it. So it initially gets them to graph it and then start to summarize according to the graph. And then they start interpreting some of that data as well, applying results to different temperatures and testing the limits, and then some extra for expert. So looking at outliers and just that real, here's some data, develop some meaning type content. So that's where things are heading as well. I suppose we also have all the science of human endeavour lessons, which I love, which put science into context. So this one's actually about curiosity and the Mars rover. So a lot of teachers use these as extension opportunities as well, or the start of research. So if they're breaking the class up into a number of different groups, they could each, you know, one group of 4 can look at Australian fossils, one can look at curiosity, one can look at resources, that kind of thing. So that's a bit of an overview of science. In terms of maths, we also have this maths skills folder, and this is like a workbook that just looks at specific skills. So this is just operations of integers practice. Then we've got addition and subtraction practice, you know, associative and commutative law, basic algebra, fractions. These are all there just as extra resources. And I suppose the students really enjoy doing these because they're like a game and they can play dash. So if we were to try this in the student zone, you can see how it looks, particularly with these lists. So they can learn them, they can quiz themselves, or they can play dash as well. And then within each year level, it's all based on the Australian curriculum with some skills. We also have NAPLAN style tests for calculator and non-calculator, and these give you a snapshot of how the class is going, and also has those recommended tasks similar to the proficiency tests. In maths, the proficiency tests are based around the previous year's Australian curriculum exit standards. So for measurement and geometry, for year 7, it's based on the year 6 measurement and geometry from the Australian curriculum. Yeah, so that's quite a lot of information. Any questions? Or Mark, is there anything that you think I've missed?
I think that's a good run through. I think now, I guess it's if we can show them how the dash works and see if we can get everyone to head to a similar place and have a wee game of that.
Sounds great. Where should I go?
Something really easy.
So maybe if we go into some things in year 7 are quite tricky. Maybe if we do year 8 matter.
Cool. So if any of you are following along and you have your control panel open, if you jump into the try as a student, so into the student zone, and then we're going to head into science. So you just click on the browse all subjects, then science, and then year 8. And I think, which one are we doing there?
Chemical sciences.
All right, chemical sciences.
And then if we have a look at matter, if not, you and I can just play each other Mark.
Yeah, all right. What's the name of the thing called? Matter. Let's see if I can find
matter.
it.
And then maybe states of matter.
Yep.
Gases.
All right, hopefully I'm in the right place.
So you can see this is what it looks like to a student. So it looks slightly different. At any point they can click start, and it's pretty, it's a bit more intuitive for them rather than the teacher preview zone. You can see they can't click next until at least 3 seconds have passed. And then we try to minimize scrolling so it's nice and just clear exactly what they need to learn. And then they basically answer some questions. If they get it correct, they get that, it could be that you, just answering the question here, it could be that you just don't have a license for maths at the moment. So we can open up that license for maths. That's probably the issue, so we can do that. Anyway, so you can see how this works. Now, if they don't write quite enough here, it will, you can see, then they get their model answer and that keyword highlighting. So I can go, actually, no, I need to work on this, and I'm going to edit it. And if I type in one of the keywords, we can see that that's what it looks like to students as well. But anyway, if we go to play Dash, this is what Dash looks like. Oh, there you are, Mark. Oh, gosh, now I'm nervous.
Oh, yeah, I know. Got a pressure now.
Okay, so this is what it looks like. You can see we're playing 2 other ghosts as well. So they're people who have previously played this game.
So you can see there, so basically what's happened with me is I've got 2 questions wrong. And you'll see up in the top right-hand corner there's a couple of lives that you lose when you answer the questions incorrectly. So what happens to me is that I've lost my life. So that means that I'm out of the race. So what this is doing is it's focusing the students on completing the smart lesson and understanding it before they move on to the game.
And you can see when you get things wrong, it's trying to, I can either view the lessons or I can retry. I can view my mistakes as well. And then we can go back to the race, and then it'll try and make me view my mistakes. And then eventually I can view the leaderboard and I can see how 5 seconds. Wow. So the current leader is from Perth, and they did that 10 question quiz in 5.42 seconds. Wow. So you can see the students get very competitive. That's amazing. Isn't that incredible? We both failed, Mark. That's sad.
We were doing it for the demonstration though, Claire, so you can't.
At least I got a little bit further along than you did. I have done that one a number of times, so I really should have passed. So if they're playing in class, it'll actually find other students from that school on that same list, so they can play against each other, or they can just do a time trial as well. So I'm sure the way the student got, what was it, 5 seconds was in the time trial, just practicing and practicing. Yes. So I think just re-looking at the description that we had for today, I just wanted to make sure we covered everything, and particularly for those who are brand new, I tried to stay with the basics. Yeah, I'll hand, and if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. But I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. It was, that was really good to see that come through, and thanks for everything there. We do have the session on the other webinar too, which is going to be running late. I think it's on Wednesday. We're running that one, and that's going to take a lot more in-depth look into the assessment side of the program as well. So if you're keen to come along to that, just sign up. And of course, if there's any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with a member of the team. And from your teacher zone, you'll see that there's a little button up the top there that says you can chat, and click on that and send us through a message, and we'll get in touch with you if there's any other questions. So thank you so much for your time, everyone, and enjoy your evening.